Have you ever noticed that if you ask 10 people what corporate diversity and inclusion means, you'll get 10 different answers? We invite you to join us for the Inclusion Score podcast as we discuss the standardization of corporate diversity and inclusion. I'm Karen Prater-Jasmine, Chief Data Officer at Inclusion Score.
And I'm James Felton Keith, CEO at Inclusion Score. We'll meet with leading experts, academics, diplomats, and business people about how to methodologically deliver corporate inclusivity across your organization's governance, HR, product delivery, and supplier diversity. Let's focus on getting D&I right, because if you've worked where we've worked over the years, you know that a bad system beats good intentions any day.
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
We're live.
Right. We are live.
Yeah, we are. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. As you heard, James is going to be taking the questions. My name is Maria Desmaison Cornejo. I am the co-founder of Ventura Collective alongside Linda Espinosa Valencia, who is here with us. And we are having a conversation with our partner, James Felton Keith, CEO and founder of Inclusion Score of the DISM Forum. And we are here to speak about the future of EDI. It is a big topic. We hope to include and to have this conversation with everyone here today that is joining us during this live session. And we will jump right into some of the conversations, some of the topics that we have been discussing behind cameras, right, throughout our work together. So please give a little introduction of each of you. Linda first, and then James for joining us. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Linda Espinosa Valencia, pronouns she, her. I'm a settler now in Halifax, Jipuktuk, in Canada, and I'm a co-founder of Ventura Collective with Ana Maria, and happy partner of James Felton Keith as well. And James, I'll give you the floor to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. We've been reading all your questions. We've been receiving all your questions via email, via DMs, via pigeon notes by night. I am James and Felton and Keith, and I have a lot of first names. You can call me by any of them. And yeah, the three of us, along with a larger body of individuals, make up the professional society that is the ISO 30415 Diverse Inclusion Service Management Forum. I know that that's a mouthful, but we just say DISM. You can go to the links on the screen at DISM Forum to learn more about what we do. But we're here to answer everyone's questions about DEI, both globally and specific to the United States, as I think everyone, not just locally, but globally, are a bit worried about what's happening in the United States. And so we're here to sort of set the record straight as D&I professionals who are practicing this work in the real world in real time. I think I'll just run on here for 2 seconds. I think a lot of people right now who are commenting on DEI, rightfully so. I think everyone can touch this topic, can talk about the topic, but I think few are actually working in DEI, advising clients right now, like these two women are, like I am, and like so many others in our community are. I think a lot of people with opinions are not actually steeped in the work. And one of the, I think, biggest opportunities that this time provides, and we'll get to it as you post your questions, is an opportunity to standardize and professionalize and clearly articulate what DEI is. I was just on a stage here in Manhattan at the Marriott with this insurance forum for Business Insurance Magazine, and I asked the crowd, how do you define DEI? And there were about 200 people in the room, and everyone kind of paused, and you heard them muddling. Obviously, I was on stage. I couldn't hear exactly what people were saying, but people were trying to answer the question at their tables or in their own breath or under their breath. And I just asked everyone to stop. the proper definition for what DEI is it is a consensus called ISO 30415. All your other definitions are relish, and they are good, and we like a little relish on our whatever we choose to put it on, but that is not specific to what DEI is in practice at companies, at institutions, at governments, at universities, you name it. So we're going to set the record straight and also talk about some of the assumed legal woes that we hear coming out of the United States. So thank you, Ana Maria. Thank you, Linda, for I know I'm actually like hosting this thing, but I feel like I am your guest. Thank you for having me. If anyone's unfamiliar, they were like, we have to do this. We have to answer everyone's questions because we're getting a million questions. I was like, let's do it. Maybe we should do this more often. So thank you, ladies. We're here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, James. Again, thank you for everyone being here. I'll pass the mic to Linda to go a little bit further into what we were talking about earlier today as we were preparing to discuss with the community the future of EDI. And James, you started saying how there is already an international consensus on what is EDI at work within the ISO 30415 standard. We are obviously talking and getting together and answering the questions pertaining to what is happening right now under certain policies in specific countries like the US. So we are going to dive a little bit into that with Linda. And also, I wanted to also remind us that this ISO, this standard, is international, right? It took 10 years to make. It took 10 years to actually develop, and it is an international standard that touches upon international human rights at work and is relevant to the UN sustainable goals, is relevant to the International Labor Organization regulations. So we are trying to constantly move forward. And yes, it's relevant to we need to have this conversation today because of what's happening, but this is already been happening in other countries in the South, in other countries in the world. So how is it that we're going to move forward together? Linda.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Thank you, James. And I just want to say, we want to acknowledge the fear, right? It's important that we, when situations like this happen, for us to feel fearful, we don't know what's happening. But at the same time, it's very important to know the rule of law is still in place, right? Nothing has changed. They're trying to change things, and that's not here yet. We need to strategize for those kind of things. But right now, the rule of law is still in place. So let's not comply ahead of time. Let's not comply to something that doesn't exist yet. Let's prepare for those things.
Yep.
Having said that, how do we get here? How this rhetoric with DEI started, right? DEI, what we call DEI today, it's work, as Ana Maria said, as James said, this is, complying to human rights at work, workers' rights. It's all encompassing in what we call today DEI. But since the murder of George Floyd, DEI got co-opted as a morality thing only, right? As the moral thing to do, because if you don't do it, is wrong, right? And that is a big problem, because that then it is only tied to whoever's morality is in leadership, right? Or whoever morality is in the DEI role. DEI is a vital process in organization, just like legal, just like IT, just like finances. And nobody is saying like, should we have money for finances next year, right? It's a vital process for the organization, and DEI is the same. Because without that vital process, your organization is at risk and is not compliant with the law. They made us believe that because especially, racialized people and other equity communities, that it was our job to change minds at work, to convince some racist people to not be racist, to convince sexist people to not be sexist. But really our job as DEI professionals is to establish process in an organization to keep people accountable that are racist or are being discriminated against veterans, against women, against whoever a protected group is. But because the rhetoric became about, oh, we need to convince people to stop doing these things, then it's all became mostly about courses on how to convince people that what they were doing were wrong, right? So we need to change that rhetoric and bringing it back to DEI is about complying with the law, about putting pieces in place, processes in place to keep accountable all the people who works in an organization. That includes everyone. That's what we always say. DEI is for everyone, not only for certain groups. It benefits everyone.
Yep. Totally. So I see that some of the questions are starting to come in. We're gonna try to answer both questions that are here and also questions that have come to us previously. I guess before we get into those, being the lone American online, I want to try to answer or debunk some questions and comments that I've been getting about the executive orders and the fear that is coming from these executive orders. As of yesterday, so I'll start from the top. We only see about 13 major companies, meaning recognizable brands, that have suggested that they're backing away from DEI. That's number one. That's 13 out of, in America alone, there are 5.2 million companies that pay taxes, a decent amount of taxes. I'm not talking about someone's one-person startup, et cetera, right? So it's a small number. I think most of the institutions that I'm talking to, they still have all their people in play. If we look at those 13 companies that have suggested that they're stepping back, a lot of their teams, et cetera, are still in play. They have moved them. They have made some legal changes to avoid risks, or specifically the risk of being sued, right? And in that regard, in being sued, I think let's discuss the protections on equal rights under the law in America that really, I think, provide a fail-safe for our current environment. Number one, with Trump's executive order last week when he got into office, it did not delete or get rid of the executive order signed in 1964 by Lyndon Johnson. It actually affirmed DEI as a practice. Trump effectively created or suggested that there's a new protected class, being cis white men, which we'll talk about later is not necessary. If you go to the dismforum.com/27 or 27, you can see the 27 diversity types. These are protected classes that all of cis white men in the United States already fit into. As Don Bennett Alexander, the creator of the employment law practice, likes to say, everybody is protected under the law, including white men. This conversation, this concept of reverse discrimination is not a real thing. You can discriminate against these sorts of folks. And that's why it incentivizes companies, no matter what kind of institution you are, whether you're a government, a university, a for-profit company, a nonprofit, it incentivizes them to have more structure in place to validate their DEI services that they might be delivering, whether those are trainings, data collection, internal infrastructure like employee resource groups, or external infrastructure like dealing with trade associations or chambers of commerce or groups specific to other protected classes. So that's number one. The executive orders actually double down on deliberate equity and inclusion work. And they're going to create a more litigious environment. That means more lawsuits, for anyone not familiar, from people who traditionally would regard themselves as being retaliated against and discriminated against, and people who are not traditionally thinking of themselves as being retaliated against. And that is going to drive up the cost of doing business. It just is what it is. Our country is divided, but business must go on, and we still have to put people to work. So that's specific to the executive orders. There are two other fail-safes in place that still give legal rights and opportunities to argue about grievances, whether we're being retaliated against or discriminated against in American law. And those are Title VII of the Civil Rights Act still exists, which is really where employment law came from, starting in the early 80s with Dawn Bennett Alexander, nearly 15 years after the Civil Rights Act came into place. Still exists. That's number one. But even if it didn't, the 14th Amendment from the 19th century states that people have equal protection under the law. And it would take 38 states to ratify a change to that amendment or deletion of that amendment, and it passing the legislative branches of U.S. Congress. And those votes don't exist because the country is, at least from a voting standpoint, evenly divided. So the current aggrieved people who would insist that they are being retaliated against and or discriminated against, still stands, and companies are liable for leaving us with any evidence that they are retaliating against or discriminating against a certain group. And so when these 13 companies that we're aware of come out with public statements about how they're deliberately pulling back from certain resources that would have been in play, forget the whatever Target is saying about DEI and having a Black History Month display. We're talking about veterans. We're talking about white women. We're talking about disabled people. We're talking about neurodivergent people, and access to participate wholly in their workplace. As it may or may not have been stated that it is being moved away, is an easy argument for any prosecutor to suggest that companies are discriminated against them. And so just as there are conservative legal funds that are sending notices to corporate boards asking them to delete their DEI mandates, there are other orgs afoot, ours included, and we're working directly with Dr. Dawn Bennett Alexander on this, to send similar notices to boards to let them know when they establish priorities to identify talent and ingest them, right? When they move away from that, it is a notable way. It is easy evidence for a prosecutor to argue that those companies are discriminated against other types of people. And that is allowed and legal in this country per the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So these executive orders, while they can control the president's ability to deploy talent inside of the institutions that he controls, which are the majority of the institutions in the federal government, it does not allow private institutions, for-profit institutions, to back away. And there are also a bunch of states, New York included, that have enshrined DEI into their state constitution that will be in a counteractive way to what the federal government is doing, enforcing companies and government institutions to keep deliberate equity and inclusion as a part of their regular business practice. So it's not going away. And now I think we can get into people's questions. Hey, Michael, I see him in the comments. Can you all see the comments really quick? You all can see?
Yes.
Okay.
We can see the comments. I can't put them on display. That has to be you because you have control.
I can put a bunch of ones.
We do have some questions here. Ana Maria, do you have anything you would like to go to before we go into the questions?
No, let's go into the questions. That would be great.
Well, I see this first one from Ruby about EO 11246, right? And again, I think I just answered a little bit of that, Ruby. Again, for anyone who can't see the question, or anyone who's listening to this recording later, Ruby asks, how does Executive Order 11246 being rescinded impact the compliance side of DEI work? Again, we think about these states, especially New York State, which I'm in, which regulates the banking sector, and the Department of Financial Services and our Attorney General have stated that they are going to be enforcing New York State Constitution on all of its regulated institutions, which is, if anyone is not familiar, every bank in the world, About 70% of the well-capitalized world comes through the New York State Department of Financial Services and their superintendent and the corresponding insurance commissioner under her. And they're going to be auditing firms for how they uphold their deliberate equity and inclusion work and how they both identify talent, how they acknowledge that talent, how they engage supplier diversity. They're going to be doing it throughout state departments and elsewhere. And again, Trump's EO, if everyone goes back to the executive order, I'll just say one more time, it actually affirms deliberate inclusion. He's just talking about a new, at least in his terms, what we will call protected class. And so it is still an open season for legal risk and the financial risks tied to that legal risk with regards to Title VII and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. These executive orders that he's been putting out are more of a scare tactic. I think the world is at a standstill right now with regards to how we engage people. But as you all's lawyers do a deep dive into this, I think they'll find and you all will realize it's still business as usual. Every company has to get out there and compete in the world and identify talent and opportunities.
And James, I think it's important to note here for the companies who have publicly said that they're going to pull back on DEI, once you really get into the details of what they're pulling, away from, it's usually certain practices that actually they're not, they're very performative. In one of them is diversity quotas, right?
Yes.
Like one of the things that we as this DISM forum has been advocating about is moving away from quotas, because the quotas are illegal. They could be illegal if they are enforced, not including different groups, right? So when you are setting quotas, then what is the attrition rate that you have if you haven't changed any process in your organization, right? If you don't have a standard such as the ISO 30415 to really create a process, a strategy that is going to not only bring people from different communities, but it's going to keep them at work, give them, all the things that they need to thrive in an organization. So usually there's a lot of turnaround. So that's one of the practices they're moving away. Another practice is, I think, be part of a diversity, what's called like, what I lost the thought of it. James, it's a diversity index. Sorry, the diversity index.
Yeah.
Right. So these are the things they're pulling away from. But DEI itself, for us to understand what DEI is, it is way beyond diversity quotas and these kinds of indexes that are not going away, right? Because they understand that it's a risk. You're putting your organization in risk if you're not constantly working on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which means all the protected classes, not only one group. It includes everyone, including white men, right? The rights of white men in an organization.
Yeah, I think, again, if I know, like, we just put a link in the comments for people to look more into these 13 companies. If a company, for instance, stops subscribing to the Human Rights Campaign's index, right, or the women's inclusion in any index you see, that's not a deletion of DEI. That's that one particular initiative. I think one thing that has stirred people so sufficiently is the headlines from the news and media are that people are deleting DEI, which is not the case. I want to address some of Bo's comments. He's asking about, I said, please address federal employees' response to Trump's action. I've spent the past week on the phone with a bunch of federal employees who have been impacted. In some offices, we see the title of the role just moving. In other offices, we've seen them disgruntled and, they're on leave. I know of more than a few that are preparing lawsuits on the federal government for, again, unconstitutionality based on the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act of of 1964 and Title VII, which is still intact, right? And so, again, there's more legal risk created, but let's not mistake the fact that the federal government is a company as well. When you ride through, the United States of America, and you come in and out of new cities, you'll see when that city was incorporated. These are companies, these are incorporated institutions as well. And the elected executive can make decisions about who gets to work where. And so I would expect a lot of these departments to be diluted, which is why we did a series of videos leading up to this about the underreporting of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, of the National Labor Relations Board, et cetera. We can expect that to go on if those organizations operate at all. It'll take a long time to rebuild those. But what we see are professional societies and trade associations picking up the slack in reporting necessary data around engagement from their various professions, because we cannot rely on the federal government to do that anymore. We also see states taking action and ramping up budgets to support that. It's still going to be difficult no matter what, but here's the difference between the companies that you all interact with and the federal government. The CEO of a company doesn't want to fire everybody and, essentially piss off a bunch of people because they still have products and services to sell at the end of the day, right? So they have different incentives, and we don't expect them to act like the president of the United States. So for Bo, I think that's some of the interaction we've been hearing. We've also seen certain budgets dry up from institutions that are distributing money based on DEI or based on that language, or they're starting to morph the language. Some standard language that we've seen come into play. Again, we did another op-ed about this a few months ago called the New World Order. And everyone's using this language now around workforce resilience. We see both insurance companies, large banks, and governments using that language to replace what people thought DEI meant. But again, I can't stress enough on to what Linda was saying earlier, in that the replacement for where we go is using more structure, defining DEI more rigorously via the international consensus, which is the ISO 30415 standard. I see there are more questions from Bo here around the ACLU.
Yeah, before you go ahead and answer more questions, I have added in the private group chat that maybe Linda can place on the LinkedIn chat of the event 2 posts that speak to what we were discussing earlier. One is by Lily Seng within LinkedIn that, they remind us that the data in 2025 is 65% of companies are maintaining their DEI budgets and activities, and 22% are increasing the spending.
Yeah.
So I have added Lily Zhang's post. Then there was another important post by Ashanti Maya Martin, where Ashanti was quoting a Reuters. How do you pronounce that? Reuters.
Reuters. Yeah.
But the title, "Despite Trump order, abandoning DEI could land companies in legal trouble," especially because of what we were discussing. And that kind of obvious point that we are now focusing even more, right? That really DEI is complying to the legal responsibilities that all employers have to protect employees from discrimination, right? So as Linda and you, James, also pointed out earlier in our conversation, moving away from how are you complying with your legal responsibilities, we moved away from that conversation towards training, which are all these services that are very important, right? But training, educating, sharing information, having difficult conversations, whatever it is that we called, that we focus on EDI, we sort of lost the true or the most important path, which was the legal compliance to actual labor law, right? So the labor law is still standing as of today. As you mentioned, James, the Constitution of the United States is still standing. And we also have to look beyond the United States and Canada, right? What is happening in Latin America? We work with organizations in Latin America that are actually honing down on EDI efforts, on complying to international law, because a lot of countries in the South and in other parts of the world are also, right, in contempt of human rights at work. They are in contempt of human rights, period. So how is it that in our small sphere of influence, which is the workplace, we know that this is not going to solve the world, and the fact that fascism is already here but it is important to center on what we can do, what is our reach of influence, and if we do work in equity, diversity, and inclusion within the workplace, how is it that we remind employers that whatever you call it, you still have to comply to the law? And if the local laws are breaking international human rights at work, you still have the responsibility to comply with international standards of what is human rights at work.
Totally. So look, there are a lot of questions in here from Michael and Ama and Phyllis and a few anonymous folks. I think if we start with the top, if we start with Michael's, I think, and getting to the end of your question around DI quotes, I'll just read the thing. Anyway, it's great to also see you, Michael. We gotta.
Yes, hi, Michael.
I gotta get at the forum. We're doing it again in October. But yeah, he's saying, so thanks for doing this. How should DEI advocates respond to the claim that DEI programs require local governments and companies to hire individuals belonging to an ISO 30415 protected class, even if that person is not qualified? I think the biggest thing that we want to debunk is that DEI does not equal quotas. So when companies get rid of quotas, again, it might make a news headline and scare everyone, but that was never DEI. The quote that I like the most, and I'll let Linda Anna Maria get in here. I don't want to soak up too much of this response, but the short answer is there are not enough white men. Not just here in the United States of America, but everywhere. And so companies deliberately seeking other types of talent are trying to make sure that they supply the demand in the workforce with the available people. And so the notion that DEI was ever about quotas is a false. It was always about putting more people to work and integrating them, in the normal economy so that we could see GDP scale. And I just say that with my economist hat on. I mean, obviously I don't have an economist hat right now. I have on a DEI hat, but you get what I'm saying. So yeah, I think that's how you respond, Michael, is just to say, this is not about taking a less talented, person. It's about filling the employment gap with the people who are there, who are available. And often these are people who are more educated and work harder. We know, at least in the United States of America, the most degreed, certified, and educated population is one of the smallest populations, but it's Black women. And if you're a CEO hiring, and this is the blasphemous thing to say, but because we have not reached pay parity, and since these attacks on DEI have started, women's pay gap has actually widened for the first time in decades. If you are a CEO hiring staff, it does not even make economic sense to not hire a woman, because there is an actual financial discount for doing so, for hiring a more educated employee. So again, my response would be debunking that it's not about talent quotas. I know everyone talks about that, but that is not a thing. There are just plainly not enough white men. Oh, go ahead, Linda.
And, as you mentioned, like the diversity of people, that doesn't mean that they are, less qualified. They're absolutely excellent qualified people of all communities that can join the workforce, right? The problem is because the organizations don't have processes in place to actually hire and have resources of hiring people from different communities, they don't know where to look for them, right? So it's like they keep using the same methods to try to attract talent, and they keep getting the same people over and over and over. And then when they find like one person that is of other called so-called diverse person, then it's
Yeah.
like we have to hire this person because the only one who showed up, right? When you see, that there's not a process in place to actually broaden the scope or where you're getting your talent. So no, it has to be debunked that, the diversity of an organization, it has to do with less qualified people, but the other way around, right? So yeah.
I know for me, I'm more qualified. I'm better than all of you all at everything. And I can run up a hill with you on my back. That's just me bragging though. But I mean it. So I want to get to I can't see this user, I just see LinkedIn user, but I'll read the question for everyone. It says, are there still legal grounds to pursue improving diversity when an organization is well below market availability for that type of talent? So I'm going to assume this is about that type of talent being one of the 27 diversity types per the ISO 30415 standard. I would say this is where we go back to the ISO 30415 standard. So I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to explain how. Then Anna Maria, Linda, feel free to jump in here. But per the standard and the framework implementing the standard, one way that it protects companies legally, if you are being sued for reverse discrimination, which again, per Dr. Don Bennett Alexander is not a thing, you established your market first. So by building out an affinity group, an advisory board, an employee resource group, whatever you want to call them, they all mean the same thing. The standard asks for something called feedback mechanisms. And when you have a feedback mechanism that can establish a community that you may need to fill a void in to access a particular market because you do business there, you name it, all you have to do is establish why you're doing that before you go after that talent, instead of issuing an ad hoc initiative that say like we're going after these people, and then you end up in a sort of hot water that Starbucks was. If anyone's not familiar, a white man, cis man, sued Starbucks saying that they were discriminating against him and others like him for hiring Asian women. And if Starbucks said, look, we do business in this community where these women exist, we've established a feedback mechanism that means we need to engage them better. They will become better consumers. They will give us good input about how we operate our company. And so we are validating that we are actively going after this talent. That is the difference between maybe getting a court case thrown out of court for $25K with your lawyer and paying a $25 million settlement, which is what Starbucks paid on that reverse discrimination charge. So to this, again, I just see blanket LinkedIn.
Robert, his name is Robert. Well, their name is Robert Jarvis Jr., MBA. Thank you for the question, Robert.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah. So the answer is yes, but how you do it matters. So companies doing things, again, we use the language ad hoc, but what I mean to say is willy-nilly. Doing stuff willy-nilly will not help if you have actors out there targeting your company. But if you do it in sequence and leverage the standard, you can both best engage this talent in an intentional way and avoid legal or insurance risk for doing it, improperly or inappropriately. I don't know if you all want to. So yeah, I'll go to okay, I see is discrimination harassment based on race still a thing? Is race still? Yes, race is still a protected characteristic, right? Trump is just adding to again, per his executive order, the potential engraved races, right? Race is a vast thing. I think we've seen race scale over the course of the past 50 years, meaning there are more micro identities than there were yesterday. We assume as generations come about, as Gen Z and Gen Alpha come to work, there will be even more micro identities than there were thought to have been yesterday. And so it will always be a protected class because what we're really talking about via race is just general difference. And so when we see people discriminate, or we have a pattern of that, or we document a pattern with an employment lawyer, we have legal grounds, right, to make an argument against institutions as being aggrieved per the 14th Amendment, per the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Title VII, and per general consensus at every state and every federal level. We just know the federal government, at least in their own workplaces, will not be enforcing this anymore.
Thank you, Ama, for that question. Hello. We highly recommend you all to follow Mahir Nisar. He's an employment discrimination lawyer. We really had the pleasure of learning a lot from him during the DISM forum in Atlanta, who Ama did a great interview panel with. So under what we've learned from Mahir was take detailed notes of the employment, the employer team surrounding you, board of directors, who is in leadership, name, all sorts of characteristics. Start taking notes, keeping emails, keeping track, learn how to start writing down the concerns and expressing when you are facing discrimination. This is for people we have to start riling up these data. We have to start collecting these data points, because we were also discussing about the importance of closing the gap, the bridge between people that face discrimination at work and actually taking legal action against the employer, right? There's still a big gap. So we were discussing with James, with Linda, we continue to discuss with other professionals, how is it that we're helping, supporting, and in community closing that gap by talking to more labor law attorneys in any country that you are on. How are you collecting the data from the employment area, place? How is that you're building your case? Because we do need to close that gap. We do need to come a lot more aggressive against discrimination within the legal action, right? So that is something also that came to our conversation.
Yeah.
Lots of questions.
Are there any? So Phyllis Reed Jarvis is asking, are there any evidence that DEI as a title will be renamed? Again, DEI is kind of something that came about from us mending all the work that everyone was doing in a scattered way. It's not a formal framework like ISO 30415, which is why I always like to, when I ask people, how would you define DEI? I just stop them in their tracks and say it is a number that consists of about 171 elements and questions and directions. It's not just the D, the E, the I. So two things about that, though. I personally, early on, I thought something might change, but I don't really see this happening because the president is making this such a contentious term. I see everyone, and again, 50% of the country is essentially doubling down, and companies are trying to figure out what to do in the middle. The other thing is, in Europe, in Southern Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, in Canada and Mexico, here in the North America, DEI or EDI, as a lot of folks outside of our walls call it, is more structurally regulated and integrated into their work. Because all these people do live in close proximity, to each other. If you think about how small, at least from a geographic standpoint, Europe is, and all of their diversity on their doorstep to the left or right, north or south. And so while everyone is watching what I think America is doing, the rest of the world is finding this, I would say, and I've gotten these calls, as an opportunity to increase inclusion in their workforce, compete for gross domestic product. And if America does, which I don't think it will, fall apart from a worker productivity standpoint, the rest of the world is prepared to compete. So I don't think DEI is going away, because now it's become this combative term, and now it's become a brand in the United States. Look, I'll just say this honestly, as a Black man, it's being used as just the word Black. So I don't think it's going away. And I usually replace the word diversity with deliberate. I think the effort to scale the economy will always be about deliberate equity and inclusion. We are solving for belonging, as our friend Christopher Bylons at Krispy Kreme likes to say. So
I would just add that, some organizations might decide to change it, to keep funding, to, like appease whatever their board, if they're related to some kind of federal thing in the US, or we saw in a couple of, we saw in Alberta, in Canada, actually, the province of Alberta in Canada, which a university changed the name in order to keep the work going.
yes.
That is going to happen in some organizations, in some corporations, in some institutions, in order to keep the work going. So
Right.
that is the main thing. Like what is called, call it whatever you like. The important is to keep that work going in a systemic and impactful way versus just keep doing the one thing that everybody's doing, like the one course that everybody has to take and anti-racism, and that's all we're staying in that lane, right? We need to move away from that to have systemic change and systemic processes in an organization through a standard such as the ISO 30415, right?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, James. Something to your point, James, is, for example, in Mexico, we have about 4 laws and norms that support and regulate anti-harassment and protect employees from discrimination. That is already in the law of Mexico. We have Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay, developing also legislation to protect employees from discrimination. And we have in Canada the Commission of Human Rights of Canada that, yes, it is actually facing a lawsuit against that the institution itself for not abiding and not protecting human rights at work. So that's another conversation to have. Yet in 2016, they developed a very clear guide for employers that is called the Anti-Harassment Policy Development document.
Yes.
They haven't yet updated it to one more recent, but all this to say, it doesn't call it EDI, but that's exactly what it is. It's anti-harassment policy. So that goes, harassment, as we know, includes racism, discrimination against gender, religion, everything, right? Accessibility, discrimination against people with disability. So this is, again, are employers complying to the law, or are employers in contempt of the law? That's really the question that we should be asking. And I also added in the chat of our conversation on LinkedIn, FNS Henderson's post, right? Where, again, it's another example of how groups are already uniting to take and challenge legislations or executive orders, that the president, in this particular case of the United States, it's trying to pass. But all this to say that, again, it is about complying with the existing law of protecting people from harassment.
So I want to, okay, so we got a lot of extra questions. I think one from Ahmed is interesting. Can we talk about the discussion is on the U.S. executive order? Could you say something about the failures and shortcomings of DEI practitioners? I certainly can, but I don't know. Do either one of you want to? I'm not sure how this question is also framed. I'm going to take it as constructive.
Yes.
Do you all want to go first?
I'll go first, if that's okay, and then you all can complement. This was by design, like a lot of what happened in DEI through the past 5 years was done by people who go thrown into DEI positions because they look the part, or because they were passionate about the subject, right? Like these committees were created, These positions were created out of nothing, without resources, without any kind of education, training given to DEI practitioners or professionals, right? Like even recently, we're calling this a profession because before everybody was doing it because they like it, they were passionate about it, it affected them personally, so they wanted to see this work advance.
Yeah.
But in these good intentions, that we all had, there were many mistakes, and one of them, once again, tying this to the morality of people, or only to the morality of people. We already know that this is a moral thing. We want everybody to feel included, that they belong, that they're treated properly, that they get paid well. All of this, we know it is the right thing to do. But DEI work, it has to become systemic. It has to be a vital process in an organization. But because DEI practitioners didn't have the tools to do that, they didn't have a roadmap to do that, a lot of mistakes were done, not on purpose. As I said, we were given the task to solve racism or discrimination in an organization. One person can't do that, especially if you had no budget, no team, no roadmap, right? So this good intention became, oh, let's try to convince people to stop doing these things, versus say, let's create a structure that keeps accountability for the organization and for employees who are displaying oppressive behavior, right? And without that accountability, then nothing can be solved, nothing can be improved. So now, of course, all the fault, it becomes like the fault of the one DEI person that couldn't solve, racism, sexism, homophobia in an organization, in a city, in a country, right? So we can't put all that on the practitioners. We have to put that on the system that created these conditions for DEI practitioners to fail.
And also, to add to that, we have to account for the hypocrisy of the organizations themselves that said, yes, we are into this. Yes, we want to do this. So let's create that one position for an EDI practitioner. Let's hire people that belong to equity due communities. Let's give them, as Linda said, and we all know, no budget, no connection to leadership, no capability to actually create, a link of a chain of communication and demand from the employees to leadership. And it is on purpose. It was done on purpose by many organizations that wanted the excuse to scapegoat the failings of their own lack of leadership and discriminatory practices with that one EDI practitioner that cannot solve anything without the support that is required to implement a proper structure. In addition, right, the standard came in 2021. So now, as of 2021, we have a consensus. Before that, we didn't have a consensus. We didn't know how to properly implement services, implement structures, and create roles and responsibilities, and really treat it as what it is, which is a management tool. It's a management system. We didn't have that as practitioners, as EDI practitioners. So we were, again, really tricked into failure, right? Cornered into failure. And also, interestingly enough, we know the demographics, especially in North America, of who were leading EDI efforts, right? In terms of, in the majority were white women in leadership, right? And that's another conversation to be had. But again, it is important to remember that it's definitely the system's agenda, right, to have this sorts of shortcomings assumed or understood as the fault of the individual, right? When we absolutely know that it's a system situation and a systemic issue. And the ISO 30415 really creates the structure in order to democratize risk, democratize responsibility, put everyone in different roles, and create the proper process and even paper trail, right, in what are the structures of these services that we have been calling EDI. They're just services towards the larger goal, which is how to comply with this international consensus now in order, right, to actually comply with the law, which is protection of rights and protection of rights at work.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add is, and I agree totally with what Linda and Anna Maria have said, but to Ahmed, I would say, and to everyone else listening in, this is an innate, or I would even say natural occurrence in the development of any fledgling profession. For a time, for maybe 40 years, we all try to address one or two issues that we might see in the market, preventing people from getting access, right? Just from a business standpoint, I think about the supplier diversity people in the auto industry in the 1980s, down to the HR talent trying to deliver DEI now because they have, empathy. It's all good work, but it has gotten us to this point. Per what they mentioned, again, about 10, 11 years ago, a coalition got together at the Society for Human Resources Management just to ask what a chief diversity officer role might entail. That evolved over a decade to move into the International Organization for Standards to develop a consensus so that we can start to craft and change what is included and what is not. And so, again, where we are was always going to happen this way. The fact that we've got a significant opposition and misunderstanding if DEI is about quotas or not is, in my opinion, a market maker. Like, this is validating the need for more rigor in our market as we try to deliver deliberate equity and inclusion to all those protected classes so that there's real economic buoyancy. And we also, again, to the foreign piece, we see this happening in per constitutions in places like India and South Africa, which have enshrined in their constitutions deliberate equity, inclusion, and equal human rights. And it's a part of their mandate to really skyrocket the institutions that prop up their economy. And so to that, I think there's another question that asks about, is accessibility of buildings and designing neurodivergent friendly spaces also part of the ISO 30415? Yes. The ISO 30415 is a framework for any organization to build the structures that it needs to adequately engage a particular protected class. Neurodivergence is one of those protected classes. And so, Linda left, she'll be right back. And so as we engage those, right, how, again, similar to what we mentioned earlier, how we engage those matters. So the process with which you go about identifying and designing, as you say, neurodivergent friendly spaces matters as much as doing it in an ad hoc way, which references one of the questions asked earlier about how do we deploy these programs. Doing it in the sequence of the standard by first validating the market by saying, for instance, we have a neurodivergent employee resource group or affinity group or feedback mechanism where these people who have been diagnosed are telling us we need certain resources. And we, as the bosses of a company, want to accommodate that. We can validate doing it, and we can protect ourselves if ever attacked in a court of law to say, this is why we're doing it, because these people exist in our organization, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so the process matters. Anyway, to answer your question, yes. And I think Anna Maria might have some more to add to that.
In the US, the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA, is still an act today.
Yes.
And
signed by Republican. George H.W. Bush.
Employers, buildings need to comply with this act, need to comply with accessibility requirements by law. So again, absolutely, as Jane said, the ISO is a framework just to hold all the responsibilities that employers have locally and abroad to comply with anti-discrimination legal frames. So absolutely. And we wanted to also to wrap up a little bit of the way in which we want to move forward. So I'll bring up some points and then give the mic to Linda. in terms of, these are the points: developing the DISM professional society, right? That James, you had the vision, and we have, many of us have already joined this amazing professional society. Then we also had another idea of closing the gap for people experiencing discrimination in all of its degrees and taking legal action, right? In the sense that we need more rigorous processes for companies to comply with the rule of law and human rights at work. And we also need more rigorous process support systems, like legal firms that are willing to create class action lawsuits, that are willing to support legal actions from individuals, resources, money, pools of money for taking legal actions against discrimination. So these are some of the points that we discussed earlier. Obviously, this is not all the answers, but these are the conversations that we were having. I'll give the mic to Linda before we close up.
No, I think that is the way that we need to move forward. We need to organize, we need to strategize, and we need to start talking about DEI not only as a moral thing to do, not only as a good thing to do, but it's a business process. It is a vital business process, just like legal, just like finances. And through the professionalization of this profession, right? We need to become certified in a standard such the ISO 30415 that provides this roadmap for us to implement an impactful service management process in organizations.
I would also add from the professional society standpoint, from the institutionalization standpoint, these two women, for everyone not familiar, are also on their country-specific advisory boards advising the ISO in the pending updates to the standard, right? And so we encourage you all to also get involved with your national certifying bodies, if there are any that filter in to the International Organization for Standards in Geneva, as we scale the consensus. And look, that's really what we're doing here. And I do see, again, we have a couple questions that we didn't get to. I might be available to run over just a little bit. I see Oscar's question about how are these policies, like the executive order, impacting federally funded institutions. Like I currently receive funds from some of these federally funded institutions and projects specific to DEI, and the old money has been distributed, but there may not be the same sort of new money. But specific to what Ana Maria mentioned and what we see at companies is institutions may often change the language to still do the work of engaging people. So we still see that the point is just this: the world will still need to operate tomorrow, if it plans to do so at all. There are many countries that are at play in our now globalized economy. So America does not operate alone. And we think that the market will do its work, but we do have to make smarter decisions about who our leaders are going forward. And these times will, I think, help remind us of that, remind us of how comfortable we've been. Charlene, we see your comments. Amma, we see your comments. I've tried to flash a bunch of these comments on the screen. There's so many, good ones in there. But yeah, we're in for troubling times because the rhetoric around what DEI is will be confusing. That said, it doesn't mean that the work is going away. And with regards to the legal implications, like I said at the very beginning, every company is still at risk of shooting themselves in the foot by backing away from certain policies and precedents that allude to retaliation or discrimination.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It is protected by the 14th Amendment of the United States, and other countries are also doubling down on their initiatives. Like Ana Maria broke down what's happening with some of the governments in Canada. They're shifting language and still distributing funds and access to opportunity. The other thing that I wanted to touch on, though, quickly before we leave is how governments do not make these decisions and issue change management for policies on their own. They do it with peer-reviewed professional societies that also agree on other global standards. So in the same way that we've had a large caucus of thousands of people across more than 160 countries, 163 come together to agree about what the parameters of DEI are from a business process standpoint, other industries and other professions have come together to do the same thing, whether it be in engineering or law or insurance or architecture or you name it, or nursing or doctoring. Is that a word? Yeah, all of them. And to that point, those peer-reviewed professional society institutions are also responsible for delivering certain types of accreditation and validation of the institutions that we trust. And it's really important to note that, because when people just think that the federal government or one executive order can shut off current work that's being done, I'd like you to reference organizations like ABET, who we are working directly with. I think I got a Monday meeting with them. If you're not familiar, go to abet.org. They are the accrediting body for all engineering colleges across the United States and the globe. One thing that we do well here in the United States is distribute peer reviews of human rights. And so a lot of international bodies also use ABET for their accreditation. And the reason they're important, and I bring them up, is last December we were at a meeting with them and they just enshrined DEI in their priorities for both research and education. And there are priorities in order for any engineering institution to receive their accreditation. So when we look at the executive orders that are targeting universities specifically, if an engineering school at a university that you know backs away from their deliberate equity and inclusion principles so that they're producing excellence in engineering and considering the whole market, and to one of the questions from earlier, designing inclusive spaces and products and services, if they back away from that, they will lose their accreditation in the coming year. And when we think about going to school, when we think about the children that we're sending to school, we should be thinking about if that institution will exist tomorrow. And so it is really important that we think about this from a institution, an organization, or community building standpoint, because the thing that makes these societies that we live in thrive are our general trust in the communities that are institutionalized and how they exist. And we expect and trust that they will be here tomorrow and that they validated some of the work that we're doing, which is why this work that we do as DEI professionals, which is different than DEI practitioners and advocates and all these people who in a willy-nilly way suggest that they are doing DEI work. Sorry, I thought my microphone went off. This is why we come together to essentially argue about what should be included, what shouldn't, and how we deploy good work. So do think about that before you get scared about any new executive order. Do think about the separate, independent regulatory bodies that consider either that industry or that profession or that region, and see what their response is first before you go, oh my God, the world is over. It is not over, but it can be if we stop showing up to do this work and making the economic argument that companies and governments need to include all of us to see society thrive. You got to do that. You got to show up. You cannot get exhausted and turn LinkedIn or the TV or the news or whatever it is off and not participate. You have to keep advocating for more inclusion in general. Again, and for anyone that targets DEI as being a gift and not rooted in merit, just remember that merit can only be a proxy of DEI after we've considered all the participants that are available to participate in our productive product or service building efforts. So
it's been amazing, and I'm sorry that we have to get going, but we didn't even touch on the market, right? Like the market actually asking organizations to do this work, right? The new generation is not, please do this. They're like, are you doing this work? Okay, I'm going to buy your product or service. Are you not doing this work? Okay, I'm going to find a substitute for you. And they're not scared to take on big corporations. So where are you going to spend the money? Are you going to spend your money fighting litigation, trying to convince your market to still buy your products? Or you're going to spend your money investing in your processes in the organization, including all your employees, including all your clients, to be successful. So you're going to have to decide, your organizations, corporations are going to have to decide that now.
Yeah. Ana Maria, anything?
No, thank you so much. Thank you, James. Thank you, Linda. Thank you for everyone's comments, participations, questions. We're just getting started. So let's continue to work.
And this is being recorded. I did see that was a question. We're going to send it out. It's going to be on all of our various, websites and podcast properties, etc. It'll also always be, right here on LinkedIn. But yeah, if you want to learn more, again, about the professional society or about the standard, you can go to disinform.com, or you can go to ISO 30415, dism.com. That's a lot. So just disinform.com, or any of the things in the links, or just, add us, DM us. I want to apologize earlier to everyone. I am at capacity for LinkedIn, so it is difficult to accept all of your invites, but I do see them. I need to go in and delete some folks and add people, but it's just time consuming. So apologies. You can still email me or anything like that. So
they can add us. We still have capacity. So get in touch with us.
Linda, Ana Maria, Google them. So yes, do that. But again, look, the work continues. And to what Linda just said, it is about the market of tomorrow and making sure that we meet these kids where they're at and put them to work. The last thing I'll say, and I'm getting more ideas as we're on, so we need to cut at least me off because I'll run on. I just want to say one more thing about, as an insurance guy, about how we look at the increasing need for deliberate equity and inclusion. We look at professional liability claims. So I look at the $25 billion directors and officers market. Those are claims from people suing their directors and officers at the company. I look at the $7 billion employment practice liability market. Those are people suing on grievances as an employee. There's the professional liability, the management liability. There's the errors and omissions liability market. For instance, if the broker who sold the insurance policy that paid out that $25 million to Starbucks for that man who claimed reverse discrimination, if that broker was aware of this potential risk and did not advise their client, being Starbucks, on that liability could come back on that broker's company. It might be a tiny brokerage. That's the errors and omission risk. When you are aware of things, this goes for anyone who is now newly aware of the ISO 30415 standard. When you are aware and don't acknowledge it as a professional, that is a liability. And I specifically am actively hunting for that liability. I do mean to threaten all of you. Linda and Ana Maria are great people. I'm questionable. So the work continues. Still send us more questions. We're always here. I think we're going to be doing more of this in general. If you're worried about what to do next with DEI, use the standard. Just use the standard. Stop making up stuff. If you don't know the standard, use the standard. Do not call yourself a DEI expert if you do not know the standard. Just say, I specialize in leadership coaching or supplier diversity or whatever. That's not the same. It's not the same as understanding whatever DEI means. You probably don't know what it means. You're probably not a pro. You're probably someone with a really interesting LinkedIn profile and a zesty hairdo. That's just coming from me. So that's all we got, folks. I think
perfect timing to cut and get in touch with us.
Yeah, we will all, we want to apologize if but whenever people had to leave. So this is recorded. Thank you all for your time. We are 13 minutes past the mark, but all very important points. And again, it's great that this is being recorded. The work is just starting. Please contact us for any information that you may have, email. And thank you, James, for all your insights. This is really, really powerful. Linda, thank you for being here, for this wonderful conversation, and to everyone attending. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you all. Thank you both.
Bye-bye.
All right, everybody.